Michael had lived in the same apartment building for the last 6 years. The walls were thin, the plumbing a bit temperamental, and the stairwells smelled faintly of cabbage, no matter how many air fresheners were hung. But it was home, a comforting routine in a chaotic, ever-changing world. That routine was disrupted one crisp autumn morning when he saw a moving truck outside. The apartment next to his had been vacant for months, its door a lonely fixture at the end of the hallway. Now, boxes and furniture were being carted in by a pair of movers while a woman and a boy stood nearby, watching. Michael stopped, grocery bags in hand, and glanced at them. The woman was striking, with delicate, angular features and silvery hair that caught the light like polished metal. Her eyes, an almost unnatural shade of aquamarine, scanned the movers with quiet intensity. Her skin, a warm pink that seemed to radiate warmth from inside. Beside her, the boy, who looked no older than 8, clung to her arm, his curious gaze darting around the hallway. "New neighbors," Michael said, more to himself than anyone else. He debated saying hello, but decided against it. Instead, he headed towards his door, making brief but intense eye contact with his new neighbor. Quickly, he slipped into his apartment and shut the door, feeling oddly self-conscious. Over the next few weeks, Michael's path frequently crossed with the new arrivals. Moments of passing and honest smiles. He learned their names quickly enough, Freya and Eric. The names seemed unusually unfitting, but then they were most likely from off-world, and human names were often adopted to make transition into human culture on Earth a bit easier. Freya's movements were graceful but strong and spoke of a life not without hardship. Eric had a quiet demeanor, though his wide-eyed curiosity brought a smile to Michael's face whenever he saw the boy inspecting a vending machine or the mail slots like they held ancient secrets. Freya was polite but distant. Her English was only a few words, spoken with a voice unfamiliar with their sounds. Michael often saw her in the hallway or at the mailboxes, but their interactions were limited to pleasantries. "Good morning, Freya," he'd say. "Good morning," she'd reply with a small, polite smile before ushering Eric along. But there was always a lingering glance into Michael's eyes, as if she was searching for something or waiting for Michael to do something he had no idea how to do. One evening, as Michael struggled with a particularly large load of groceries, Freya appeared seemingly out of nowhere. "Me help?" she asked, seeing that he was struggling. Her voice was soft but firm, and she made the gesture of assisting with the many bags. Yeah, actually," Michael admitted, twisting his hand over and dangling his keys, then nodding toward the door. Freya smiled and gently took the keys from his hand. Their fingers had brushed gently as she had taken them, and the contact filled Michael with a sudden and heart-twisting need to hold her. He shook off the feeling and walked inside. "Thanks, I owe you one," he said as he piled the bags onto the kitchen counter. He freed his hands and turned to thank Freya, but she had gone. Michael let out a sad sigh as he was hoping for a few more brief moments in her presence. She had been filling his thoughts recently, and he found he enjoyed it. As he made to close the door, an urge took over, and he found himself in front of Freya's door instead. Michael took a deep breath and knocked softly on her door. The door soon opened, but instead of Freya, Michael was greeted by Eric, the young boy. "Hi, Eric," Michael said warmly. "Hi, Middle," Eric said, not familiar with how to speak his name. "Can I talk with your mom, please?" Michael asked. Eric looked confused and said something in his native language. When Michael didn't understand, Eric said it again, slower and louder. Michael chuckled nervously and was about to walk away when Freya emerged from the back hallway. She saw Michael and, with a big smile, hurried over to the door. Michael returned the smile, unable to contain the happiness that bubbled up inside him every time he saw her. "Hello, Michael," Freya spoke with a warm but curious tone. "Hi again, Freya," Michael said. He stood awkwardly, rocking back and forth on his feet. "I was wondering," he began, but stopped when Freya's eyes briefly looked confused. Michael sheepishly bit the inside of his lower lip, realizing she didn't understand him. He then raised his hands in a defeated gesture of surrender. "Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you," he said, and turned to leave. "Michael," Freya said, stopping him. She gestured for him to wait for a minute, and using hand movements indicated she was going to get something. She returned a moment or two later, holding what looked like a portable Bluetooth speaker that Michael had had when he was younger. Freya stepped close to him and then spoke in her native language close to the speaker. A moment later it translated, and then said her words in English. "This is a translator. I find English hard to speak. Is it okay if we use this?" Michael laughed, relieved to be able to finally speak to Freya. "Of course. I am glad to speak to you." He looked her in her eyes properly and said, directing his voice at the speaker, "You were very nice to help me just now, and I wanted to return the favor by making you and Eric dinner." Freya looked suddenly confused and angry. "You want to make us your dinner?" came the translation of her harsh words. "No, no, no," Michael said, realizing the error. "I want to invite you and Eric over to my place, and I will make food for us all to eat." Freya waited and listened, her expression changing from defensive anger to a big smile. She began laughing and had to brace herself against the door frame. After a moment or two, she finally regained her composure. She spoke to the translator and held out her hand. "My people hold the hand of the person we are talking with because we can sense their feelings. It's more important than words." She glanced down at her outstretched hand. Michael gripped her hand, and as he did, he felt a bubbling joy in his stomach, causing him to giggle. He met her gaze while still hand in hand with her. "I want to spend some time getting to know you and Eric," he said to the translator. "We often eat a meal together, and talk is a way to get to know other people." Michael tried to convey curiosity and calm into the unfamiliar connection of emotions in their shared hand hold. Freya listened to the translator while continuing to hold Michael's gaze. She squeezed his hand a bit and said yes. Freya, Eric, and Michael spent a few hours making food. Michael would start the dish. Freya would occasionally taste and add a few other spices into the food, a few of which she had brought with her. Eric would take a bite sneakily and then go back to the couch where he sat playing on a tablet. The food was different than Michael had planned, but it was delicious. At the table he sat next to Freya, holding her hand while eating and talking using the translator that they had set on the table. Eric would occasionally look up from his tablet and join the conversation. Michael thought to himself that Freya was amazing and that Eric was a really good kid. It was just a passing thought, but when he looked at Freya, she was blushing. They were still holding hands, and Freya had felt that loving emotion through the connection. "Sorry," Michael said sheepishly, turning red with his own blush. Freya patted their joined hands with her free hand. "It's okay, Michael. I haven't felt anyone share that emotion in a very long time."
"Me either," he said.
The rest of their night went on in the same fashion, holding each other's hand and talking. After a long while, Eric had fallen asleep on the couch. Freya said it was time to go, so Michael gently picked up Eric and all three walked back to Freya's apartment. Michael found the unusual bed that belonged to Eric and gently placed him into it. When he stood, he found Freya standing in front of him. She smiled softly and placed her hand on the middle of his chest. Michael felt a surge of emotion flow over him. "Thank you for tonight," Freya said, and walked him to the door. Back home in his own bed, Michael laid for hours, just thinking of Freya. 2 months had passed in a similar fashion, having dinner together almost every night. One morning, Michael overheard a tense conversation in the hallway. Peeking through his door, he saw a stern-looking man in a dark suit speaking to Freya, his voice low but clipped. "Your documentation is incomplete," the man said. "If we don't receive the necessary approvals, you and your son will have to leave." Freya's posture was stiff, her hands gripping Eric's shoulders protectively. "I've provided everything required," came her reply. "Please, we need more time." The man's expression didn't soften. "You'll receive a formal notice soon." After he left, Michael stepped into the hallway. Freya's eyes snapped to him, wary and guarded. "Are you okay?" Michael asked gently. Freya hesitated, then sighed. Michael approached her, looking into her eyes as he had many times before. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked down, and they began to roll down her cheeks. Michael pulled her into a hug, which she gratefully accepted, the thing that Michael had wanted to do for weeks. Suddenly the world around him dissolved. Gone was the apartment hallway, being replaced by a shadowy planet filled with smoke and fire. Michael could feel the heat, smell the smoke, and next to him he saw Freya, not as she is now but rather as she was then. This was a memory, and Michael was just witnessing it.
War.
Freya and Eric running, hand in hand, terror etched across their faces. Michael watched as they fled from the advancing army of green-skinned aliens. He watched as Freya and Eric made it to a transport ship, lifted off the planet and into orbit. He watched as the planet below suddenly began to be dotted with what could only be nuclear bombs. He felt the emotions of both Freya and Eric, their deep sorrow, the fear and panic giving way to loss and hopelessness. Everything that they had was now gone. All their family, their belongings, their safety gone. He saw as the Alliance ships arrived and helped the survivors, giving them food and a place to sleep. Freya was told she would be taken to a place of safety. They were now refugees from another planet, part of a small group granted temporary asylum on Earth. Their human names were given to them upon arrival in Norway at the Interplanetary Aid headquarters, but their true names were unpronounceable in any human language. Freya's resilience was incredible, and Eric's quiet bravery touched him deeply. Michael felt a new emotion rise in his mind, but this one came from him. Protection. He would do whatever he could to protect these two amazing beings. He would give them the best life he could manage. He felt Freya pulling back from the connection, and he parted from it as well. When Michael opened his eyes again, he saw that Freya was staring up into his eyes, tears running down her face. She put her hand on his chest once again, Michael's heart beating faster at her touch. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I need to go," Freya said, as she closed the door. For 6 days Freya gave only a brief sad smile in passing to Michael. She had pulled away from him, and Michael didn't really know why. Monday morning came with an overcast sky and a feeling of impending doom. Michael had no reason for this feeling, but it filled his mind as he made his coffee. He sat on edge, sipping and trying to understand what was happening to him when a knock came on the door. Freya was there, panic evident on her face. She held up the translator and was speaking frantically. "I don't know what to do. I have been called to the immigration office for a hearing. I think we are being sent away. I have no one to watch Eric. Can he stay with you while I go?" There was a pleading look in her eyes. Michael tossed on his shoes and jacket and said, "I am coming with you. I'll watch Eric and keep him close so that you don't worry." The three drove to the stark, white official building. The deportation hearing was held in a cold, sterile government office. Michael sat beside Freya and Eric, the three of them surrounded by officials and translators. Freya spoke into her translator, her words laced with desperation as she pleaded her case to not be sent back to the war-torn planet. She didn't know what else she needed to do and started to panic. Michael placed his hand on hers and let a feeling of peace and calm flow to her. Michael's heart ached as he watched her struggle. The human magistrate spoke as if it was her decision to come to Earth and that it was her fault that the paperwork was not in order. Michael stood and cleared his throat. All the eyes turned towards him. "Freya deserves to stay," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "She and Eric have done nothing wrong. They're kind, honest, and hardworking. This isn't just a legal matter. It's about doing what's right. I have seen her memories. They are survivors from a planet-ending war," he continued. "They are here because there is nowhere else for them to go. This planet has become their home." He glanced at Freya, who was watching him with wide, surprised eyes. The words he'd been holding back for weeks tumbled out before he could stop them.
"I love her," he said.
"I love Freya and Eric like they're already a part of my family. Please don't take them away." For a moment, the room was silent. Freya's expression softened, her eyes opening wide when she heard the translation. "Just because you have feelings for her doesn't mean she can legally stay. She isn't a citizen of this planet. She isn't a citizen of any planet anymore," shouted Michael. Michael paused as he felt Freya stand next to him and slip her delicate fingers in between his. "Your Honor," she said through the translator. "This man and I are bonded according to the customs of my people. A week ago we became one, sharing thoughts and memories. I have bound myself to him, and I can feel that he has done the same to me. I am his partner. His wife. Michael turned and looked at her in surprise. You didn't know what happened. It was an accident that morning, but we bonded. Freya said to Michael. You have been feeling my emotions, and I have felt yours. I didn't think that you felt the same for me. If you truly do feel that way, then we can be together, and it doesn't matter where we go. Michael faced her and kissed her deeply. She wrapped her arms around him and kissed him back. You are mine. I am yours, Michael said to her, somehow not in English, but in her own language. An official that appeared to be of the same species as Freya stood up. Your Honor, he has spoken the binding words. They are married by all of our customs. The judge looked around the room. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He shook his head slowly to himself. I am getting too old for this, he said softly to himself. Under interplanetary law, a married couple cannot be separated by deportation. The judge said. If I hadn't seen it happen in front of me, I wouldn't have believed it. Congratulations on your marriage. Freya and Eric are granted citizenship of Earth. 1 year later, Freya, Eric, and Michael stood in the entranceway of their new home. Speaking in their native language, Freya and Eric stood arguing about which room was going to be Eric's and which one was going to be his sister's. Freya rubbed her very, very pregnant belly. Michael stood with a huge goofy smile. Freya noticed him standing there and turned to him. What's got you smiling so big? She asked him, still in the native tongue. He kissed her deeply. I think I know something you have been keeping secret, he whispered, bringing his hands to her belly. Michael grabbed Eric's hand and gently placed it on Freya's belly also. Eric, what do you feel? Michael asked. Mom, my sister, Eric said. Wait. Mom. Freya laughed. It was supposed to be a surprise. Eric, you're going to get the smaller room, and your twin sisters are getting the bigger one, Michael said knowingly. Fine, Eric said with fake irritation. As for you, young lady, how long have you known? Michael asked. Not long. I could only tell there were two a few weeks ago, she said with a smirk. I love you, Michael said, bringing her into an embrace. I love you too, Freya responded.